April 1943. The hot North African sun beat down on three German women standing in a British interrogation tent near the ruins of Bizerte, Tunisia. Elsa Hoffmann pressed close to Liesl Bergmann and Margareta Adler, her hand shaking. A British officer walked past them speaking to another soldier. The words coming from his mouth made Elsa's heart stop. He was speaking perfect German, not broken German, not German with an accent. Perfect German like he grew up in Hamburg just like she did. Elsa grabbed Liesel's arm and whispered, "Did you hear that? Are we in the wrong country?" The younger woman's eyes went wide with confusion. Even Greta, who always stayed calm, looked troubled. They had been captured by the British 3 days ago. Everything they knew told them the British spoke English, not German. Something was very wrong. Or maybe something was very different from what they had been told. The spring of 1943 brought disaster to German forces in North Africa. After months of fighting in the desert, Rommel's Afrika Korps finally collapsed. The British and American armies closed in from all sides. In early May, approximately 130,000 Axis soldiers surrendered in Tunisia. Among them were 847 German women who served with the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. These women worked as radio operators, cipher clerks and signals personnel. They were not fighters, but they wore uniforms and served their country. Elsa Hoffmann was 24 years old and came from Hamburg, a big port city in northern Germany. Her father owned a small shop selling imported goods before the war. She grew up middle class, comfortable, and believed in the cause. 2 years ago, she joined the Luftwaffe Signals Corps to do her part. She worked as a radio operator sending and receiving coded messages. Her equipment was German-made Telefunken gear, top of the line when she first got it. Crystal-controlled receivers with frequency ranges from 3 to 25 MHz. Morse code keys with spring-loaded contacts. She knew every switch, every dial, every frequency by heart. She could recognize operators by their fist, the way they tapped out Morse code. Each operator had their own rhythm, their own signature. Back home, her fiancé, Hans Weber, served on a U-boat somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. She had not heard from him in 8 months. Every night she wondered if he was still alive. His last letter talked about victories at sea, about how Germany was winning the war against British shipping. He wrote about the future they would have together when the war ended, when Germany won. That seemed like a lifetime ago now. Liesl Bergmann was only 19 and came from a tiny farming village in Bavaria in the mountains of southern Germany. Her family grew wheat and potatoes on their small farm, about 100 acres. When the war started, there was no work in her village. All the young men left to fight. Liesl joined the Luftwaffe because she needed to eat and wanted to help Germany win. She worked as a cipher clerk, turning coded messages into readable German. She sat at wooden tables for hours, working through substitution codes and transposition ciphers. Numbers became letters, letters became words, words became orders that moved armies across the desert. She wrote letters to her mother every single week, telling her about the warm weather and the sand that got into everything. She never told her mother about the fear, about watching the war turn bad, about the retreating columns of German soldiers with hollow eyes. Her brother Karl was somewhere in Russia with the Wehrmacht. She had not heard from him in 9 months. Margareta Adler, who everyone called Greta, was 31 years old and came from Berlin, the capital city. She went to university, which was rare for a woman in Germany. She spoke 3 languages, German, English, and French, and understood how the world worked. Greta joined the Signals Corps early in the war and became a senior officer. She was smart enough to see through some of the propaganda, but she kept her doubts quiet. Speaking against the government could get you killed. So she watched, she listened, and she wrote things down in a small notebook she kept hidden in her uniform pocket. For months, these 3 women and 844 others served at a signal station in Tunisia. They lived in tents. They ate dry bread and thin soup. They sent messages about troop movements and supply lines. They watched the war turn bad. German soldiers started retreating. Supplies stopped coming. Then the British and American tanks appeared on the horizon. The German commanders told them what to expect if they were captured. The propaganda was clear and terrifying. The British would execute women prisoners or force them into hard labor, or worse things that the officers would not say out loud, but everyone understood. They were taught to destroy all their equipment and fight to the death rather than surrender. Being a woman in enemy hands meant certain horror. At least, that is what they were told. That same day, near the coastal city of Bizerte, their signal unit was abandoned. The German army retreated so fast they left the women behind. British tanks rolled into their camp at dawn. The women had no weapons. They had no way to escape. They raised white flags made from bed sheets. 847 women stood together in the morning sun, waiting to see if the propaganda was true. The British soldiers were professional. They searched the camp but did not harm anyone. They gathered all 847 women in the center of the camp. A British officer stood on a truck and spoke through a loudspeaker. His English was translated by another soldier. They were prisoners of war now. They would be processed and transported. They would be shipped across the Atlantic Ocean. That was all they were told. Elsa felt her stomach drop. Across the Atlantic meant America or Canada. That meant thousands of miles from home. That meant months or years before seeing Germany again, if ever. Liesel started crying quietly. Greta put her arm around the younger woman but said nothing. Her face stayed blank, but her mind was racing. Where were they really going? What would happen to them? The women were loaded into trucks and driven to a larger British camp. They were given numbers and processed like cargo. They stood in long lines under the hot sun. British soldiers checked their names against lists. Medical officers looked them over for diseases. They were given clean clothes. The British were efficient and cold, but not cruel. Nobody hit them. Nobody threatened them. This confused Elsa. Where was the torture? Where was the violence they had been promised? At night, the 847 women were locked in a large warehouse. They had blankets and water. Some women cried, others prayed. A few argued that this was just the beginning, that the real horror would come later. Elsa lay on her blanket and thought about Hans. She wondered if he knew she had been captured. She wondered if he was eating better than she was. She wondered if she would ever see him again. Greta sat with her back against the wall and watched the other women. She was thinking about the German officer who told them the British would kill them. She was thinking about the British soldiers who gave them water and blankets. She was thinking about the propaganda and the reality. They did not match, not even a little bit. This thought scared her more than anything else. If the propaganda was wrong about this, what else was it wrong about? The women spent 3 weeks in the British camp. Then came the announcement. They would board ships bound for Canada. 847 women would cross the ocean to a place none of them had ever seen, a place they knew nothing about except what the propaganda told them. And after what Elsa heard that British officer speaking in the tent, after hearing perfect German from enemy lips, she was starting to wonder if anything they had been told was true. The women faced the unknown. They did not know what came next. But they were about to discover that sometimes your enemies know your language better than you know the truth. May 1943. The British loaded all 847 German women onto a massive ship called the HMS Empress of Canada. The ship was huge, bigger than any building Elsa had ever seen. It was a passenger liner before the war built to carry rich people across the ocean in comfort. Now it carried prisoners. Along with the women, 2,400 German male soldiers were also on board. The men were kept on different decks. The women would not see them during the voyage. Elsa, Liesel and Greta walked down a metal stairway into the ship. They expected to be thrown into cargo holds. They expected darkness and chains. Instead, British sailors led them to small passenger cabins. Real rooms with beds, not straw on the floor, not hammocks, actual beds with mattresses. Liesel touched the bed like she thought it might disappear. She had been sleeping on dirt and sand for 6 months. This mattress felt like a cloud. Each cabin had 4 beds. Clean white sheets sat folded on each mattress. Elsa picked up a sheet and smelled it. It smelled like soap. Real soap, not the harsh lye soap they had in Tunisia. The cabin even had a small sink with running water. Cold water, but clean. She turned the tap and watched clear water pour out. In the desert, water came in rusty containers and tasted like metal. This water looked pure. The ship left port on May 28, 1943. The engine rumbled deep below their feet. Elsa stood on the deck and watched the African coast disappear. She did not know if she would ever see Europe again. Beside her, Liesel was crying quietly. Greta stood with her arms crossed, watching the ocean with careful eyes. She was always watching, always thinking. That first evening, British sailors came to the cabins and told the women to follow them to the dining area. The women walked in silence through narrow hallways. They entered a large room with tables and chairs. The smell hit them first. Bread, fresh bread baking. Elsa's stomach growled so loud that Liesel heard it and almost laughed. When was the last time any of them smelled bread that was not mixed with sawdust to stretch the flour? British sailors served them dinner on metal trays. Elsa stared at her tray and counted everything on it. 2 slices of white bread with real butter. A cup of coffee that smelled like actual coffee beans, not the roasted grain substitute they drank in Germany. A piece of fish with boiled potatoes. A small bowl of canned peaches. She picked up the bread and touched the butter. It was yellow and soft. Real butter. She had not seen real butter in over a year. She pressed her finger into it. The indent remained. In Hamburg, butter was a memory from before the war, something her mother talked about like it was gold. Here the enemy gave butter to prisoners like it was nothing. Elsa took a bite. The butter melted on her tongue, rich and creamy, tasting like her grandmother's kitchen before the war. She closed her eyes for a moment. Sunday mornings. Her grandmother making pastries. The smell of butter and sugar and warmth. Rationing every drop of fresh water. Living in a steel tube under the ocean with 50 other men, never knowing if the next depth charge would crush them all. The enemy fed prisoners fed her better than Germany fed its soldiers, better than Germany fed Hans. This was not what they taught her. This was not what the propaganda said. Liesel ate slowly, like she was afraid the food would be taken away. She whispered to Elsa, "This is better than what we ate in Tunisia for months." Elsa nodded. It was better than what German soldiers ate anywhere. The propaganda said the British were starving because of German U-boats. These people did not look like they were starving. The next morning brought another surprise. Breakfast. 3 meals a day, every day. Breakfast was porridge with milk and sugar bread with jam and tea. Elsa wrote in her small diary that she kept hidden in her dress pocket. She wrote the date and then the words, "They give us more food than our own army gave us. Why?" During the day, the women were allowed on certain parts of the deck for fresh air. Greta noticed things. She always noticed things. She watched the British guards walking past. Their boots were leather well made with thick soles, no cardboard stuffing, no holes patched with wire. German soldiers in Tunisia wore boots held together with wire because there were no replacement parts. The supply lines had collapsed months ago. These enemy guards had better equipment than German officers. On the 3rd day of the voyage, a British medical officer came to examine all the women. He was an older man with grey hair and kind eyes. He checked each woman for diseases and injuries. He gave them vitamin pills in small paper cups. Vitamin pills. Elsa almost laughed. The German army could not get vitamins for soldiers dying of malnutrition in Russia. Men were losing their teeth, their hair, their ability to see in the dark. Scurvy, beriberi, diseases from another century. But the British gave vitamins to prisoners. She swallowed the pill and wondered what kind of war this was. What kind of enemy had medicine to spare for captives? The ship sailed for 3 weeks. Every day, 3 meals, every night clean beds. The British guards were firm but never cruel. They did not touch the women. They did not threaten them. They just watched and made sure nobody tried to escape. Where would they escape to in the middle of the ocean? One evening, Liesel heard 2 British guards talking. They were complaining about the food. One guard said the rations were boring. The same thing every day. Boring. Liesel wanted to scream. She was eating better on this prison ship than she had eaten in a year, and these men called it boring. She lay in her bed that night and tried to understand. How rich was this country that guards complained about good food? Greta sat with Elsa one afternoon on the deck. The ocean stretched in every direction, blue and endless. Greta said quietly, "They treat us like humans. The propaganda said they would treat us like animals. Which one is the lie?" Elsa had no answer. She was starting to think everything might be a lie. On June 19th, 1943, the ship reached Halifax, Canada. The women were told to gather their few belongings. They were led off the ship onto a dock. Canada, a new world. The dock was busy with people and trucks and activity. Everything looked organized and clean. No bomb damage, no ruins. It looked like war had never touched this place. British and Canadian soldiers loaded the women onto trains, the Canadian Pacific Railway, long passenger trains with windows. The women climbed aboard and found seats, real seats with cushions. Through the windows, Elsa could see the city of Halifax. Buildings stood tall and whole. Shops had goods in the windows. People walked the streets in clean clothes. Nobody looked hungry. Nobody looked scared. The train started moving west. For days they travelled across Canada. Elsa pressed her face to the window and could not believe what she saw. Forests that went on forever. Farmland so huge it made her dizzy. Towns and cities that had no bomb damage at all. At night, lights blazed in every window. No blackouts. No fear of bombers. Liesel whispered, "They are not even afraid. The war has not touched them." Every station they passed had shops full of goods. People stood on platforms looking well-fed and healthy. Greta watched everything and said nothing, but Elsa saw her writing in a small notebook. Greta was keeping track. She was counting and measuring and thinking. Something was very wrong with what they had been taught, or something was very right with this strange country that spoke English and fed its enemies better than Germany fed its soldiers. June 22nd, 1943. The train slowed down in the late afternoon. Elsa looked out the window and saw a small station ahead. The other women started gathering their belongings, thinking this might be their final stop. The train hissed and squealed as it came to a halt. Through the window, Elsa could see a wooden sign hanging above the platform. She read it out loud, Kitchener, Ontario. The doors opened and Canadian guards told them to step out onto the platform. All 847 women climbed down from the train cars, blinking in the bright June sunshine. The air smelled different here, fresh, green, like grass and trees and growing things. A man in a neat uniform walked toward them. He looked like a station master. He stopped in front of the group and opened his mouth to speak. "Willkommen in Kitchener." Welcome to Kitchener, in German. Perfect German. The same German Elsa's grandmother spoke in Hamburg. Every single woman froze. 847 women stood completely still, staring at this Canadian man speaking their language. Liesel grabbed Elsa's arm so hard it hurt. She whispered, "Is this a trick? A test? Are they trying to catch us saying something?" Greta's eyes went sharp. She listened carefully to how the man spoke. She turned to Elsa and said quietly, "That is a Bavarian accent from southern Germany, not someone who learned German in school. He grew up speaking it." More people appeared on the platform. Local civilians coming to watch the prisoners arrive. Two women stood near a bench talking to each other. They spoke German. Then one of them turned to a man and switched to English. Back and forth, German and English mixing together like it was the most normal thing in the world. An older man walked past pushing a cart. He was humming a song. Elsa recognized it. A folk song from the Rhine Valley. Her father used to sing it. This Canadian man was humming a German song while he worked. A woman with a baby walked by. She was singing to her child, a lullaby, in German. The same lullaby Elsa's mother sang to her when she was small. Children were playing near the edge of the platform. They were counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in German. A shopkeeper was unloading crates from a cart. He yelled at his helper, "Vorsichtig!" Careful in German. Elsa looked at Liesel with wide, frightened eyes. Are we in the wrong country? Did the ship take us to Germany by mistake? But that made no sense. The signs were in English. The flags were Canadian. They were definitely in Canada. So why did everyone speak German? Not just officials, not just the station master, villagers, everyday people, shopkeepers, farmers, mothers, children, all speaking German like it was normal, like they were German, but they were Canadian. How the station master led them down the main street. Elsa looked at everything as they walked. A newspaper stand on the corner had papers in 2 languages. She could read the German one, Der kanadische Bauernfreund, the Canadian farmer's friend, a German newspaper, in Canada. Her head started to hurt from trying to understand. They passed a church. The sign out front had words in English and German both. Sunday service 10 a.m. in English, Gottesdienst 10 Uhr auf Deutsch. The same information, 2 languages like both were equally normal here. Street signs caught her eye. Friedrich Street, Wilhelm Avenue, Goethe Lane, German names on Canadian streets. A butcher shop had a sign, Richter's Fleischerei, Richter's Butcher Shop, in German script. Greta noticed too. She said nothing, but Elsa saw her writing in that small notebook again. The guards led all 847 women to a large brick building. The station master explained in German that this was St. Jerome's College, a Catholic school. The students were gone for summer, so the women would stay here. A priest came out to greet them. He was an old man with white hair and a kind face. He spoke to them in German with a Swabian accent, the same accent Liesel's grandmother had back in Bavaria. Liesel started crying, not from fear, from confusion. Nothing made sense anymore. The priest patted her shoulder and said in German, "You are safe here, child. No harm will come to you." Inside the building, Canadian women showed them to large rooms with beds, real beds with mattresses, not straw, not blankets on the floor, mattresses with springs and sheets and pillows. Elsa sat on a bed and it was soft. She had slept on hard ground for so long that soft felt strange. A Canadian woman showed them the bathroom. She turned on a tap and steam rose from the water. Hot water. Running hot water. Liesel touched the stream and jerked her hand back. It was actually hot. The woman smiled and said in German, "First hot shower in a while, yes. Take your time. We have plenty of hot water." That evening they were led to a huge dining hall. The room could seat 900 people easily. Long tables stretched in rows. The smell of cooking food made Elsa's mouth water. Real food, meat cooking, bread baking, butter melting. Canadian women in aprons brought out plates of food. Elsa looked at her plate and could not breathe for a moment. Roast beef, a thick slice of actual beef. Mashed potatoes with gravy. Carrots. 2 slices of white bread with real yellow butter. A glass of milk. A piece of apple pie for dessert. She picked up her fork and cut the meat. She counted while she ate. From years of helping her father weigh goods in his shop, she could estimate weight by eye. The piece of beef on her plate weighed about 15 ounces, about 425 grams. Wehrmacht rations in Africa were 200 grams of meat per week. Per week. She was eating more than twice a week's ration in one meal. At the next table, 2 local women were talking. Elsa heard them complaining in German about rationing. One woman said, "Only 450 grams of meat this week. How am I supposed to feed my family?" The other woman agreed. They were upset about 450 grams. Elsa wanted to laugh or cry or scream. German civilians back home got 250 grams per week if they were lucky. Her mother's letters, the ones that stopped coming 6 months ago, talked about standing in line for hours for a small piece of gristly meat that was mostly bone. These Canadian women were complaining about getting more meat than Germans ever saw. She thought of Hans. If he was still alive, he was on a U-boat eating hardtack and canned fish, rationing every drop of fresh water, living in a steel coffin under the ocean. The enemy-fed prisoners fed her better than Germany fed its soldiers, better than Germany fed Hans. Liesel ate her pie slowly, making each bite last. She had not tasted real apples in over a year. The apples were sweet, and the crust was made with real butter. She could taste it. She could taste the sugar and the cinnamon and the care that went into making this. That night, lying in a real bed under clean sheets, Elsa tried to make sense of everything. This must be a special camp, she thought, for propaganda, to make them think Canada was rich and wonderful. This could not be real. This could not be normal life here. It had to be fake. It had to be. But Greta sat on her bed writing in her notebook. She was not saying much, but Elsa could see her mind working. Greta was adding things up, counting, measuring, thinking. Liesel just stared at the ceiling. She was too overwhelmed to even process what was happening. Everything she thought she knew about the enemy was wrong. Everything. And that was more terrifying than any torture could have been. Because if this was wrong, what else was a lie? If the enemy spoke German like villagers in Bavaria, if they gave prisoners butter and vitamins and roast beef, if they had cities with no bomb damage and lights blazing at night, what did that mean? It meant the propaganda was false. It meant they had been lied to about the enemy, and if they had been lied to about this, what else were they lied to about the war, the cause, everything they believed in, everything they fought for? Elsa lay in the darkness and listened to the sounds of 847 women trying to sleep. Some were crying softly, some were praying. Some were silent, lost in their own thoughts. Tomorrow they would wake up in this strange place, where the enemy spoke their language better than they spoke the truth. Tomorrow they would have to face what that meant. But tonight, Elsa just lay there feeling the soft mattress beneath her, smelling the clean sheets, tasting the ghost of butter and roast beef, and wondering if everything she had ever been told was a lie. July 1943. The Canadian authorities decided that the German women prisoners would work. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war could be assigned to work as long as it was not war work. No making weapons, no building military things, but farm work was allowed. Factory work was allowed. And Canada needed workers because so many Canadian men had gone overseas to fight. Elsa and many others were assigned to work at a meat processing plant in Kitchener. The name of the company was Schneider Meats. When the women heard the name, some of them laughed for the first time in months. Schneider was a common German name. Even the businesses here had German names. Liesel was sent to live and work on a farm outside town. The family name was Vogel. Bird, another German name. It made her smile despite everything. Greta was assigned to work at the local hospital as a translator. Because she spoke 3 languages and was educated, they needed her to help German-speaking patients talk to English-speaking doctors. The hospital was happy to have her. Canadian veteran guards watched over the prisoners. These guards were mostly older men who had fought in the First World War. They were too old now to go fight in this new war, so they guarded prisoners instead. Many of these guards were also of German descent. Their grandparents came from Germany 50 or 60 years ago. They spoke some German words they learned from their parents. On her first day at Schneider Meats, Elsa walked into the processing plant and stopped. The building was huge. She had worked in a factory in Hamburg before the war. That factory had old equipment that broke down constantly. Belts snapped, gears stripped, motors burned out. They never had spare parts to fix anything. Workers stood idle for hours waiting for repairs that never came. This Canadian factory looked like it came from the future. Metal machines lined the walls gleaming under electric lights. Electric conveyor belts moved smoothly with no jams, no stuttering. Industrial refrigeration units hummed steadily, keeping the meat cold. German factories back home used blocks of ice that melted by midday. Stainless steel cutting stations reflected the overhead lights. Steam sterilization systems hissed and cleaned equipment between shifts. Safety equipment hung on the walls, gloves and aprons and protective gear for every worker. Everything was modern and clean and worked. The plant processed 2,000 hogs every week. 2,000. Elsa tried to imagine that much meat. In Hamburg, people waited in lines for hours to get a small piece of pork. Old women fought over scraps. Children went hungry. Here, mountains of meat moved through the factory every single day. A woman walked up to Elsa and spoke in German. "You must be one of the new workers. I am Frau Richter. I will show you what to do." Frau Elisabeth Richter was about 50 years old, with grey hair and strong hands. She spoke German with a Hamburg accent, the same accent Elsa had, the same accent her mother had, the same accent her grandmother spoke. Elsa could not help herself. She asked, "You are from Hamburg?" Frau Richter smiled. "My grandparents were from Hamburg. They came to Canada in 1870. I was born here, but my grandmother taught me to speak proper Hamburg German. She said I should never forget where we came from." They worked side by side, cutting and packaging meat. Frau Richter showed Elsa how the machines worked, how the conveyor systems moved the product, how the refrigeration kept everything fresh. She explained the safety procedures, the quality standards, the production schedules. It was organized, efficient, professional. Nothing like the chaos of German factories where supplies ran out, where machines broke and stayed broken, where workers improvised and hoped. During their morning break, the workers could eat sausages, free sausages, as much as they wanted. Elsa watched Canadian workers grab sausages and eat them like it was nothing special, like free meat was just a normal part of the day. She took one small sausage and ate it slowly. It tasted like real meat with real spices. Not the mystery meat mixed with breadcrumbs they got in Germany. Not the sawdust sausages that fell apart when you bit into them. Real pork with pepper and sage and salt. She heard two workers complaining. "Same sausages again. So boring. I wish they would give us something different." Boring. She was eating better than she had eaten in a year. They called it boring. She thought about her mother in Hamburg, if she was still alive, standing in line for hours for a ration card that might get her 100 grams of questionable meat once a week. She thought about Hans on his U-boat, eating canned fish that had gone bad, drinking water that tasted like diesel fuel. The enemy gave free meat to workers, good meat, and they complained it was boring. At lunch, Frau Richter sat with Elsa and opened a letter. "From my cousin in Hamburg," she explained. "She writes me about the situation there." Frau Richter's face grew sad as she read. Her hands trembled slightly, holding the thin paper. "She says they are starving. No meat, no butter, barely any bread. The bombing is constant, every night. She lives in a basement now. Her building is gone." She looked at Elsa. "You are from Hamburg too." Elsa nodded. She felt tears starting, but pushed them back. "Your family?" Frau Richter asked quietly. "I do not know," Elsa whispered. "No letters for months. I write, but nothing comes back. I do not know if they are alive." Frau Richter reached across and touched her hand. "I pray for them. I pray for all of them. Every night I pray for my cousin, for everyone still there." Elsa looked at this woman. Same German heritage, same language, same city roots, same grandmother's dialect. But Frau Richter lived in abundance while her cousin starved, while Elsa's mother starved, while everyone they knew in Hamburg starved and burned and died. The only difference was which side of the ocean their grandparents chose. One decision 70 years ago by people long dead, and it meant the difference between plenty and starvation, between peace and bombs, between life and death. That thought made Elsa sick. Meanwhile, Liesel was sent to the Vogel family farm 20 miles outside Kitchener. The farm was 400 acres. 400. Liesel's family farm in Bavaria was 100 acres, and people in her village called it a large farm. The Vogel farm was 4 times bigger, and they had things Liesel had only dreamed about. 2 automobiles, one for work hauling equipment and supplies, one for Sunday drives to church and visiting neighbours. Her family in Bavaria had a horse cart, one horse that was old and tired, electric milking machines in the barn. Liesel had milked cows by hand since she was 7 years old. Her hands were calloused from squeezing teats for hours. These machines did the work in minutes. Clean, efficient. The cows did not even seem to mind. A radio in the living room. Liesel had heard a radio twice in her life, both times in the village square when the mayor made announcements. The Vogels had one in their home. They listened to music, to news, to weather reports, whenever they wanted. A telephone on the wall, connected to the outside world. They could call neighbors, call the veterinarian, call family in other towns. Just pick up the receiver and talk. Electric lights in the barn. No more lanterns. No more fire danger. Just flip a switch, and the whole barn lit up bright as day. Liesel stared at these things like they were magic. Mr. Vogel was kind, but serious. His 3 sons were all overseas fighting with the Canadian Army, fighting against Germany, fighting against Liesel's brother Karl somewhere in Russia. Mr. Vogel did not talk about it much. He just worked the farm and waited for letters and prayed his sons would come home. Mrs. Clara Vogel spoke German with a Bavarian accent because her parents came from Bavaria, near Munich, the same region as Liesel's village. Mrs. Vogel treated Liesel like a guest, not a prisoner. She gave her a clean room with a real bed. She fed her the same food the family ate. On Sunday, Mrs. Vogel invited Liesel to join them for dinner. Roast chicken. Golden brown skin, crispy and perfect. Potatoes with butter, not the watery potatoes boiled without salt that Liesel grew up eating. Fresh vegetables from the garden, carrots and beans and lettuce. An apple cake for dessert made with real sugar, real eggs, real butter, real apples. Liesel ate carefully, trying not to look like she was starving, even though part of her still felt hungry all the time. Her body did not trust that food would keep coming. Her stomach cramped from months of near starvation, unused to this much richness. Mrs. Vogel noticed. She put more food on Liesel's plate. "Eat, child. You are too thin. We have plenty." Plenty. That word rang in Liesel's head like a bell. They had plenty, while their sons fought a war, while their boys were in Italy and France, and who knows where, shooting at German soldiers, shooting at people like her brother Karl. Her family had nothing while Karl fought the same war from the other side. Her mother's last letter months ago talked about eating potato peels boiled into soup, about the neighbor's baby dying from hunger, about the constant fear. How could this be? How could 2 families, both German, both farming, both sending sons to war, live in such different worlds? One evening, Mrs. Vogel sat with Liesel on the porch while the sun set over the fields. The crops were growing, corn as high as Liesel's shoulder, wheat turning gold, everything healthy and strong. "My sons fight for Canada against Germany," Mrs. Vogel said quietly, "but we speak German at home. We sing German songs. We make German food. We remember where we came from." She paused and looked at Liesel. "You can be both, German and Canadian. You can love your heritage and still love freedom. They are not the same thing." Liesel's mind could not process this idea. In Germany, loving your culture meant loving the Nazi Party. They were the same thing. One package. You could not separate them. To be German was to follow the Führer. To question the party was to betray Germany itself. But here these people separated them. They kept their language, their food, their traditions, their pride in being German. And they threw away the dictatorship, the hate, the war. They chose what to keep and what to discard. Liesel did not know that was possible. At the hospital, Greta worked with doctors and nurses. She translated for old German-speaking patients who never learned English. Some of them had been in Canada for 40 or 50 years, but still spoke German at home. One day she was translating for an elderly woman who needed surgery. The woman was 75 years old, frail and scared. Her chart said she had 3 sons. All 3 served in the Canadian Army. All 3 were fighting against Germany right now. Greta had to ask. She could not help herself. "Your sons fight for Canada, but you speak German at home." The old woman looked at her with tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much. "We speak German because it is our language. We are Canadian because this is our country." She reached out and took Greta's hand. Her grip was weak, but her voice was strong. "You can be both. We are not fighting for Germany. We are fighting against the Nazis. There is a difference. A big difference. Greta felt something crack inside her. A wall she had built, a certainty. She had held a belief she thought was unshakable. You can be German and still be free. You can love your language and culture without loving the government. You can keep your identity without keeping the ideology. This idea was new, dangerous, revolutionary. In Germany, loving your culture meant loving the Nazi Party. They told you so every day, on the radio, in the newspapers, in the schools. They were the same thing, inseparable, indivisible. But here they were separate. Culture and politics, heritage and government, identity and ideology. You could choose. And that choice, that possibility, that freedom to keep some things and reject others, shattered everything Greta had built her life on. At night, the women gathered back at St. Jerome's College in their dormitory rooms. They talked quietly about what they saw during the day. Elsa told them about the meat factory. They waste more meat in trimmings than we see in a month. The workers snack on sausages during breaks. Sausages like it is nothing. Free meat whenever they want. Liesl talked about the Vogel farm. They have 2 cars, and electric machines, a telephone, a radio. My family in Bavaria does not even have electricity in the barn yet. We use lanterns. We milk by hand. We are still living like it is 1900. Another woman named Hilda worked at a furniture factory. The machines never break down because they have spare parts for everything. Everything. When something breaks, they fix it the same day. In Germany, we waited months for parts that never came. We improvised. We made do. Here, they just fix things. Some of the younger women started crying. One girl, maybe 18 years old, said, "My brother is in Russia eating frozen bread and fighting with broken rifles. He wrote that half his unit does not have proper winter coats. They wrap themselves in newspaper under their uniforms. Why? Why are we so poor and they are so rich?" Greta spoke up quietly. She had been thinking about this for weeks, watching, analyzing, putting pieces together. Because they are not spending everything on war. They send men to fight, yes, but their economy still works. Their people still eat. They built a country that can afford to fight and still take care of home. We built a country that eats itself to feed the war machine. An older woman named Hilda Neumann got angry. She was 35 from Berlin, had been a Nazi party organizer before the war. She stood up and her voice was sharp. "This is propaganda. They are trying to break us. This is all fake." They picked a special town, special people, special food. It is not real. It is a show, a performance to make us weak, to make us doubt. Do not fall for it. Elsa shook her head. It is not fake. The German families here get letters from Germany, real letters from their relatives. Everyone there is starving, while everyone here complains about rationing that gives them more food than German soldiers get. Frau Richter's cousin in Hamburg is living in a basement eating potato soup. That is real. This is real. "You are a traitor," Hilda said coldly. "I am seeing the truth," Elsa shot back. "We were lied to, used, thrown away. The commanders left us in Tunisia to be captured. They ran. They saved themselves and left us. And now we are eating better as prisoners than we ever ate serving Germany. What does that tell you?" Other women joined in on both sides. Voices rose. Some agreed with Elsa. Some sided with Hilda. Most sat in the middle, confused and scared and not knowing what to believe anymore. The 847 women were no longer united. They were divided into camps within the camp. The Transformers. About 340 women who accepted what they were seeing, who let the evidence change their minds, who admitted they had been lied to. Elsa was one of them. Greta was another. Liesl was moving that direction slowly, painfully. The resistors. About 250 women who refused to believe it, who insisted everything was fake propaganda manipulation, led by Hilda and other true believers who could not let go, who held on to the ideology because without it, they had nothing. The conflicted. About 257 women who were stuck in the middle, torn, terrified. Liesel had been one of them for weeks, seeing the truth but afraid of what it meant. Because if everything you believed was false, what was left? Who were you? What had you fought for October 1943? The tensions between the groups grew worse. Then something happened that forced everyone to choose a side. A guard at the meat processing plant was badly injured in an accident. A machine broke. Something snapped and metal slammed into him. Heavy bleeding. Possible internal injuries. He was lying on the factory floor, blood pooling around him, dying. Greta was there doing translation work. She had medical training from her time in the Signals Corps. She knew how to stop bleeding, how to stabilize injuries, how to keep someone alive until real doctors arrived. Hilda's group of resistors were also there. They started yelling, "Let the enemy die! Do not help him! Let him bleed out! He is the enemy!" Greta ignored them. She ran to the guard. She applied pressure to the wounds. She elevated his legs. She kept him conscious, kept him talking, kept him alive. The other workers watched in stunned silence. The guard survived. The factory manager called a doctor. They took the guard to the hospital. He would live because Greta saved him. The commander of the guards heard about it. He was a quiet man who had supervised the prisoners for months without much interaction. Now he sought Greta out. "You saved his life," he said simply. "Thank you." He reported it to the community leaders. They discussed it, and they made a decision. They would hold a special event to thank the prisoners. Something that had not happened since the war started. Something they thought might help these women, might show them something important. They would hold Oktoberfest. September 24th, 1943. The guards loaded the women onto trucks and drove them to the Concordia Club, the German social club in Kitchener. When the women heard about this, they did not know what to think. A party for prisoners. Nothing made sense anymore. The Concordia Club was a large brick building with flags hanging outside. Inside the hall was decorated with autumn leaves and German folk art. Long tables were set up with white tablecloths. A small band was setting up instruments in the corner, accordion, violin and drums. Elsa walked into the hall and stopped breathing for a moment. The smell. Oh God, the smell. Schnitzel frying in butter, sauerkraut cooking with bacon, potato dumplings boiling in big pots, apple strudel baking in the oven, the smells of home, the smells of her grandmother's kitchen in Hamburg, the smells of Sunday dinners before the war, the smells of childhood and safety and love. She had not smelled these foods in over 2 years. Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. Her throat closed up. Her chest felt tight. These were the smells that meant family. That meant celebration. That meant being German in the deepest, truest sense. Not the Nazi sense, not the military sense, the cultural sense, the human sense. 300 German-Canadian civilians filled the hall. Old people, middle-aged people, young women whose husbands and brothers were overseas fighting. Everyone was dressed nicely. The women wore their good dresses. The men wore clean shirts and ties. 50 Canadian guards stood around the edges of the room watching, but not interfering. The food was laid out on long tables. Elsa saw platters of breaded schnitzel still hot and crispy the way her grandmother made them, bowls of red cabbage cooked with apples, sweet and sour and perfect, mountains of potato dumplings with butter melting on top, heavy and filling and wonderful, sauerkraut mixed with bacon pieces salty and rich, rye bread sliced thick real bread with real flour, apple strudel golden brown and dusted with sugar, the pastry so delicate it flaked at the touch. Real food, German food, food she thought she would never taste again. The organizers allowed each woman 1 small glass of German beer, not much but real German beer brewed right here in Kitchener. Liesel took a sip and started crying. It tasted exactly like the beer from her village in Bavaria. Exactly the same. The same yeast, the same hops, the same recipe brought over by immigrants 80 years ago and kept alive. The band started playing traditional German folk songs, songs about mountains and rivers and home, songs Elsa's father used to sing while working in his shop, songs Liesel's mother hummed while cooking, songs Greta learned as a child in Berlin. Every woman in the room knew these songs, every single one. They were part of being German, part of the culture that ran deeper than politics, deeper than war, deeper than ideology. An elderly man walked across the hall toward Elsa. He was maybe 70 years old, with white hair and a kind face. He walked slowly like his joints hurt. He stopped in front of her and spoke. Not regular German, Platt Deutsch, Low German, the dialect spoken in northern Germany around Hamburg. The exact dialect Elsa's grandmother spoke. The language of her childhood, of bedtime stories and birthday songs and whispered secrets. "You remind me of my granddaughter," the old man said in Platt Deutsch. "She lives in Hamburg. Is your family from there?" Elsa could not speak for a moment. This old Canadian man spoke her grandmother's exact dialect, perfect Platt with the Hamburg accent, the rhythm, the vocabulary, the particular turns of phrase that marked you as a true Hamburger. She finally found her voice. "Yes, Hamburg. My family lives there." His eyes filled with tears. "I have not seen my granddaughter in 4 years. Before the war, we used to write letters every month, but nothing comes anymore. Do you know what it is like there?" "Is she?" His voice broke. Elsa broke with it. All the strength she had been holding onto for months, all the walls she had built shattered in 1 second. "I do not know. I have not heard from my mother in over a year. No letters. Nothing. The city is being bombed every night. That is all I know." The old man put his hand on her shoulder. Tears ran down his wrinkled face. "My granddaughter, my little Heidi. She is only 16. Just a child." They stood there crying together, both from Hamburg, both German, both terrified for family trapped in a burning city, both victims of the same terrible war. But on opposite sides. How did that make any sense? How could they be enemies when they shared the same language, the same culture, the same fears, the same tears? Across the room, a young Canadian woman approached Liesel. The woman was about Liesel's age, maybe 20 years old. She had blonde hair and blue eyes and spoke with a Bavarian accent. "You are from Bavaria. I heard you talking earlier." Liesel nodded, not trusting her voice. The Canadian woman sat down next to her. "My parents came from Bavaria near Munich. I have never been there, but they told me stories. They sang me the songs." She twisted a handkerchief in her hands. "My brother is in Italy right now with the Canadian army. I am so scared for him. Every day I wait for letters. Every day I am afraid." Liesel whispered, "My brother Karl is in Russia with the Wehrmacht. I wait for letters too. I have not heard from him in 9 months. I do not know if he is alive." The two young women looked at each other. Same age, same fears, same hope that someone they loved would survive this madness. The Canadian woman reached out and took Liesel's hand. They sat there holding hands, two enemies crying for brothers who were trying to kill each other. Liesel thought her heart would break. They were the same, exactly the same fears, same hopes, same tears. So how were they enemies? Greta stood against the wall watching everything. She watched German Canadians singing German songs. She watched them laughing and speaking German and celebrating their culture. But they were Canadians, loyal Canadians, sending their sons to fight Germany, proud of Canada. Proud of being Canadian. They loved being German, and they loved being Canadian at the same time. Both, not one or the other. Both. In Germany you could not do that. Being German meant following the Führer. It meant the Nazi Party. It meant everything together in one package. You could not pick and choose. You could not keep the culture and reject the politics. They told you it was all or nothing. But here these people picked. They kept their language and food and music and traditions. They threw away the dictatorship and the hate and the war. They proved something Greta never knew was possible. You can be German and free. You can love your heritage without loving what Germany had become. That realization hit Greta like a physical blow. Her entire understanding of the world cracked and fell apart. Everything she had built her life on was wrong, not just wrong, a lie, a complete and total lie. The evening ended at 9 o'clock. The guards loaded the women back onto trucks. The ride back to St. Jerome's College was silent. Nobody spoke. They were all too overwhelmed. That night in the dormitory, the women fell apart. Some cried quietly into their pillows. Others cried loudly, not caring who heard. Some sat in stunned silence, staring at nothing. Elsa sat on her bed and started screaming. Not words, just sound. Pure emotional release. They lied to us about everything. Everything. A younger woman, maybe 18 years old, grabbed Elsa's arm. What do we do now? What do we believe? Elsa had no answer. How do you rebuild your entire understanding of the world? How do you accept that everything you fought for was based on lies? Arguments erupted. Hilda and her resistors shouted that this was a trick manipulation, sophisticated propaganda. Elsa and the Transformers insisted they had seen the truth with their own eyes. Most of the women fell somewhere in the middle, confused and lost and terrified. Finally, near midnight, Greta stood up. She had been quiet all evening. Now her voice cut through the noise. We survive. We remember what we have seen here. And when we go home, we tell the truth. Elsa looked at her. What truth? Greta's voice was steady, but her eyes were full of pain. That we were lied to. That the enemy showed us more kindness than our own government ever did. That you can be German without being Nazi. That freedom exists, and we never had it. The room went silent. Everyone knew Greta was right. They had seen it with their own eyes, tasted it with their own mouths, heard it with their own ears, felt it with their own hands. The propaganda was lies, all of it, and that truth was more terrifying than any torture could ever be. May 7th, 1945. The guards called all 847 women to gather in the main hall at St. Jerome's College. The radio was turned up loud. Everyone stood quietly waiting. Then the announcement came. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then some women started crying. Others collapsed into chairs. A few smiled with relief. Most just stood there trying to process what this meant. After 6 years of war, it was finally finished. Germany had lost. Everyone they fought for had lost. Everything they believed in had crumbled. Elsa felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard on the floor. It was over. The war that killed millions. The war that destroyed cities. The war that took hands. She had received confirmation 3 months ago. His U-boat was sunk in the North Atlantic in October 1943. All hands lost. He was already dead when she ate apple pie at Oktoberfest. Already dead when she learned what butter tasted like again. Already dead when she started to understand the truth. She whispered, "Thank God. Thank God it is over." Liesel cried into her hands, not from sadness, from relief so strong it hurt. Maybe her brother Karl survived. Maybe he could come home now. Maybe the dying would stop. Maybe the world could begin to heal. Greta stood with her arms crossed, her face blank. But inside she was thinking. Germany lost. The Nazi regime was finished. What happens now? What becomes of Germany? What becomes of us? In the following weeks, news came from Germany. Letters started arriving again. Reports came through the Red Cross. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. Berlin was rubble. Hamburg was destroyed. Cities they knew were gone. Block after block of ruins. Millions of people displaced, homeless, wandering through the wreckage looking for family members who would never be found. Starvation everywhere. People eating grass, eating bark, eating anything they could find. Children with swollen bellies and hollow eyes. Old people dying in the streets. The Nazi leaders were being hunted and arrested. Trials were coming. Justice was coming. But justice would not bring back the dead. Justice would not rebuild the cities. Justice would not heal the wounds. The whole country had collapsed into chaos. Elsa read letters from Frau Richter's cousin in Hamburg. The cousin was still alive, barely, living in a basement, eating one meal every 2 days, drinking water from broken pipes, surrounded by death. Elsa had to find her mother, had to know if her family survived the bombing. Even though Germany was destroyed, it was still home. She could not abandon her mother. Not now. Not after everything. Liesel was afraid there was nothing left in Bavaria. The farm was probably gone. Her brother Karl, she learned from a Red Cross letter in June, was alive, but in a Soviet prisoner camp. He might not come home for years, if ever. The Soviets were not known for their mercy. Her mother was old, weak, alone. The village was destroyed. The future there was uncertainty and hardship and slow starvation. Greta had no family left in Berlin. The city was divided now between the Soviets and the Western Allies. The Soviet zone was dangerous for anyone who had worked for the Nazi government, even in a small way, even as a radio operator, even if you were just following orders. The Soviets did not care about excuses. The Canadian government began planning for repatriation, sending prisoners home. But they gave the women a choice. They could return to Germany, or they could apply to stay in Canada. If they stayed, they needed a sponsor, a job, and had to pass security screening to make sure they were not dangerous. This choice tore the 847 women apart: stay in the country that was their enemy, or return to the homeland that had lied to them. Both options felt wrong and right at the same time. Elsa decided to return. She had to find her mother. Frau Richter gave her a letter for her cousin in Hamburg. Elsa promised to deliver it if she could find the woman alive. Germany was destroyed, yes, but it was still home. Her mother was there. Her past was there. She could not abandon it, no matter what she had learned about the lies, about the propaganda, about the truth. Even if Hamburg was rubble, even if everything was gone, her mother was her mother. Liesl chose to stay. The Vogel family offered to sponsor her. Mrs. Vogel hugged her and cried when Liesl told her the decision. "You are family now," Mrs. Vogel said. "You always will be." Liesl thought about her village in Bavaria, the small farm with no electricity, the uncertain future, if anything was left at all. Her brother might not come home for years. Her mother was old and could barely work the land alone. But here in Canada, Liesl had abundance. She had freedom. She had a future. She could send money to her mother, maybe bring her here someday. Here she could build something. There she had nothing but ashes and memories. She told Elsa, "There is nothing left in Bavaria for me. Here I have a future." Greta also chose to stay. The hospital offered her a permanent job as a translator and nurse. No family left in Berlin. The Soviet zone was too dangerous. Staying in Canada meant safety and a chance to help other refugees who would come after the war ended. She accepted immediately. Of the 847 women, 300 decided to stay in Canada. The other 547 would go home. October 1945. The German-Canadian community organized a farewell ceremony at the Concordia Club, the same place as the Oktoberfest 2 years earlier. Everyone came. The women who were leaving, the women who were staying, the German-Canadian families who had helped them, the guards who had watched over them. There were tears and hugs. Addresses were exchanged. Promises to write were made over and over. The German-Canadian community gave each woman returning to Germany a care package: food, soap, clothes, medicine. Things Germany did not have anymore. Things that might keep them alive another month, another week, another day. The guard commander, the quiet man who had supervised them for 2 years, gave a short speech. His voice was rough with emotion. "You were never our enemies," he said. "Just people caught in a terrible war. We wish you well. We hope you find peace." Elsa hugged Frau Richter. They were both crying. Frau Richter pressed a letter into Elsa's hand. "For my cousin in Hamburg, if you find her, tell her I love her. Tell her I pray for her every night. Tell her I have not forgotten." Elsa promised. She would try. She would do everything she could. December 1945. The 547 women who chose to return boarded ships in Halifax Harbour. The journey was different from their arrival. They knew what waited for them now. Rubble, starvation, a broken country, a broken people, a broken world. But they also knew something else. They knew the truth. They knew what freedom looked like. They knew their government had lied to them. They carried that knowledge like a heavy weight. Elsa carried her Red Cross parcel filled with food and clothes. She carried the letter from Frau Richter. She carried her diary, 192 pages long now, every word a record of her transformation. She carried photos from Canada and contact addresses written in careful handwriting. But what she carried mentally was harder to describe. Knowledge that everything she believed was false, understanding of what real freedom meant, guilt about what Germany had done to the world, hope that Germany could rebuild on better principles, memories of kindness from people she was taught to hate. The ship docked in Bremerhaven in January 1946. The women walked down the gangway into a country they barely recognized. The port was damaged. Buildings stood half destroyed. People shuffled past, looking thin and grey like ghosts. German soldiers in ragged uniforms begged for food. These were the victors they had believed in. These were the supermen they were told would conquer the world. They were broken and starving and defeated. Elsa took a train to Hamburg. The journey took 2 days because the rail lines were damaged. Trains stopped and started. Sometimes they sat for hours waiting for tracks to be cleared or bridges to be declared safe. When she finally arrived, she could not believe her eyes. Hamburg was gone. Not damaged. Gone. Block after block of rubble. Buildings burned to shells. Craters where streets used to be. People living in basements of destroyed houses. The shop where her father sold imported goods was a pile of bricks. The church where she was baptized had no roof. The school where she learned to read was a burned-out skeleton. She found her mother living in what remained of their old apartment building, just 2 rooms still standing in a structure that once held 20 families. Her mother was alive, barely. She weighed 43 kilograms. Her clothes hung on her like sheets on a skeleton. Her hair was white. Her face was aged 20 years. She looked 70, not 50. When Elsa walked in, her mother stared like she was seeing a ghost, like she did not believe it was real. Elsa dropped her Red Cross parcel on the floor. It split open. Cans of food rolled across the broken floorboards. Cans of meat, cans of vegetables, chocolate, coffee, soap, medicine. Her mother fell to her knees and started crying. Real food. Food from Canada. Food that might keep her alive another month. Elsa knelt down and held her mother. Her mother felt like bones, like there was nothing left of her but will and grief and hunger. The first words Elsa spoke were, "Mama, I brought food." The second words she spoke were, "They lied to us about everything." Her mother just nodded. She already knew. Everyone in Germany knew now. The lies had become obvious when the lies could no longer protect anyone from the truth. The years after the war were hard for everyone, but especially for those who returned to Germany. Elsa stayed in Hamburg with her mother. She used her English and her Canadian experience to get work with the British occupation forces as a translator. The British soldiers needed help talking to German civilians. Elsa helped process refugees flooding in from the Eastern Territories, people who had been forced from their homes by the advancing Soviet army. She never forgot Frau Richter. They wrote letters back and forth for 40 years, long letters about their lives, their families, their memories, about what they had learned, about what it meant to be German in a world that hated Germany. She found Frau Richter's cousin in Hamburg in March 1946. The woman was alive, living in a basement skeleton thin, but alive. Elsa delivered the letter. The cousin wept. It was the first word from family she had received in 3 years. In 1948, Elsa met a British soldier named Robert Thompson. He was kind and gentle and reminded her that not all military men were cruel, that not all soldiers were monsters. That war did terrible things to people, but some people remained human through it all. They married in 1949. She moved to England with him. She was German, lived in Canada as a prisoner, and became British by marriage. Her life crossed all the battle lines of the war. In 1961, Elsa published a book. She called it The Enemy Who Fed Us. It was her diary from those years in Canada with extra details added from memory. The book told the truth about how Canadian enemies treated German prisoners better than the German government treated its own soldiers. Some people in Germany got angry at the book. They said she was a traitor. But many more people read it and nodded because they knew she was telling the truth. They had lived it too. They had seen the lies. They had paid the price. Liesl became a Canadian citizen in 1950. It took 5 years of paperwork and interviews and waiting, but finally she stood in a courthouse in Kitchener and swore loyalty to Canada. She cried through the whole ceremony. Tears of relief, tears of joy, tears of gratitude. In 1952, she married Johann Vogel, the youngest son of the family that sponsored her. They had 4 children together and raised them on the farm outside Kitchener. Those children grew up speaking German at home and English at school, just like their father had, just like the German-Canadian tradition that went back 100 years. In 1953, Liesl brought her mother from Germany to Canada. The old woman stepped off the train in Kitchener and looked around at the clean streets and the well-fed people and the shops full of goods. Her first words were, "Now I understand your letters. You were not lying. This place is real." Liesl's mother lived another 20 years in Canada, never once regretting leaving Germany behind. She learned some English. She made friends. She helped in the garden. She held her grandchildren and sang them German lullabies and told them stories about the old country that no longer existed. Greta became the head translator at Kitchener General Hospital by 1955. She never married. She said she was married to her work, and her work was helping people. She dedicated her life to helping German refugees settle in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. Between 1947 and 1960, she personally helped process over 2,400 refugees. She found them housing jobs and language classes. She translated their documents and their fears and their hopes. She held their hands when they cried. She celebrated with them when they succeeded. In 1982, the Canadian government gave Greta the Order of Canada. It is one of the highest honours Canada gives to civilians. The ceremony was in Ottawa. Greta stood in her best dress, now 71 years old, while the Governor-General pinned the medal to her chest. The citation said she was being honoured for humanitarian work and for building bridges between communities, for turning enemies into friends, for proving that kindness was stronger than hate. People in Kitchener called her the Angel of Kitchener. She smiled when she heard that, but said she was just doing what anyone should do, what any decent human being would do. The 300 women who stayed in Canada built lives there. By 1950, all 300 had become citizens. They married and had children and became part of the community. 47 of them married Canadian men, mostly men of German descent, who understood their language and culture. These women helped sponsor over 3,000 German refugees in the 1950s, using their own experiences to help newcomers adjust to Canadian life. They knew what it was like to be afraid and alone. They knew what it was like to need help. So they helped. The 547 women who returned to Germany had harder lives. They lived through the rubble years, the cold winters with no fuel, the hunger that lasted until the Marshall Plan brought American aid in 1948. But many of them became advocates for democracy in the new Germany. They had seen what freedom looked like. They knew it was possible to be German without being Nazi. They taught their children the truth about the war, about the lies, about what really happened. 34 of these women eventually moved back to Canada in the 1950s and 1960s, bringing their families with them. Germany was rebuilt, but the memories were too painful. The weight was too heavy. Canada offered a fresh start. For decades, the women who stayed in Canada and those who returned to Germany wrote letters to each other. They shared news about their lives, their children, their grandchildren. They maintained the friendships formed in that strange time when they were enemies becoming witnesses. In 1983, someone had an idea. It was the 40th anniversary of their arrival in Canada. Why not have a reunion? Bring together as many of the original 847 women as possible. The idea spread through letters and phone calls. Women who had not seen each other in 40 years started planning to attend. September 24th, 1983. Exactly 40 years after the Oktoberfest that changed everything, the reunion was held at the Concordia Club, the same building where they had cried, and realized the truth. 127 of the original 847 women came. Some flew from Germany, some drove from across Canada, some were brought by their children and grandchildren. They were all around 60 years old now, grey-haired and wrinkled, but still the same women who had stood confused on a train platform 40 years earlier. German and Canadian media came to cover the event. Reporters interviewed the women. Cameras filmed them hugging and crying and laughing. They shared old photos. They told their stories. They introduced their families to each other. Elsa stood up to speak. She was 64 now, living in England, a grandmother of 5. Her voice shook but held steady. In 1943, we asked, "Are we in the wrong country?" She paused and looked around the room. The answer was no, we were in the right country. We just did not know it yet. She looked at Liesel, still living on the Vogel farm with her husband and grown children. At Greta, the Angel of Kitchener, standing straight and proud. Canada showed us what our own country could have been if we had chosen freedom instead of following a dictator. The Canadians did not defeat us with guns. They defeated us with butter, with kindness, with truth we had been denied. Her voice broke. They proved that Germans could be free, prosperous, and good without a Führer. Our government said we needed a strong leader to survive. Canada showed us we needed freedom to thrive. 127 women stood and applauded. Some cried. Many smiled, because they had spent 40 years living the proof. Truth is stronger than lies. Kindness is stronger than hate. And sometimes your enemy shows you who you really are. Liesel spoke next. She was 59, her hands rough from farm work, her face lined from sun and wind and time. This community showed me that being German did not mean being Nazi. You can love your heritage and still love freedom. You can speak German and be Canadian. You can be both. Germany forgot that. Canada never did. Greta was 71. She stood straight and spoke clearly. We were prisoners of war, but we found freedom in captivity. We came as enemies and left as witnesses to the truth. The Canadians did not imprison us. Our own government imprisoned us in lies. The Canadians set us free by showing us what truth looked like. The reunion lasted 3 days. The women donated materials to the Canadian War Museum and the Kitchener Archives. Elsa's diary, 847 letters, 340 photographs from 1943 to 1945. Red Cross records documenting their treatment, all preserved so the story would not be forgotten. Their story became part of Canadian school lessons about how to treat prisoners of war. It helped shape Canadian refugee policies after the war. When refugees came from Hungary in 1956, Canada remembered how German prisoners became Canadian citizens. The story proved that treating enemies with dignity could turn them into friends. In 1998, a university student came to interview Greta. She was 86 years old and one of only 3 original women still alive. The student asked her to explain her experience in one final statement. Greta thought for a long moment, looking out the window at Kitchener, the city that had become her home. Then she spoke. People ask me how I could forgive the Canadians for imprisoning me. I tell them the Canadians did not imprison us. Our own government imprisoned us in lies. She paused. The Canadians set us free. They fed our bodies with bread and our minds with truth. We came as soldiers for a lie. We left as witnesses to what humanity could be even in war. Her voice grew softer but stronger. The real question is not why German Canadians spoke German. It is why we did not know that Germans could be free, prosperous and good without a Führer. That realization that we could have had what these Canadians had without the war, without the hatred, without the death, that was the hardest truth to swallow. She looked directly at the student. We were never in the wrong country. We were on the wrong side, and it took the people we called enemies to show us what our own people could have been. 847 German women entered Canada between April and June 1943. 0 died in Canadian custody. 300 became Canadian citizens. 547 returned to Germany. 127 lived to attend the 1983 reunion. 3 were still alive in 1998 when Greta gave her last interview. Their story is a footnote in history. Most people never heard of them, but it is also a testament to humanity. It proves that war is fought between governments, but lived by people. That propaganda dies when confronted with human kindness. That the enemy often has more in common with us than our own leaders. That freedom means being able to love your heritage without hating others. That sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is admitting your country was wrong. That sometimes humanity transcends nationality, even in history's darkest hours. Elsa kept her diary until she died in 1995 at the age of 76. Her grandchildren found it in a wooden box in her attic in England. 192 pages filled with her neat handwriting. The last entry, written in 1994, said simply, "I went to Canada as a prisoner. I left as a free woman. Not because the Canadians released me from captivity, but because they released me from lies. That is the greatest gift one human can give another, the truth." The 847 women learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. They came as believers and left as witnesses. And their witness still speaks today, reminding us that truth is stronger than lies and kindness is stronger than hate.